Lecture 33, More Advanced Queuing Theory. There are a few new considerations, or if you prefer, complications, to queuing theory that we haven't covered in the fairly simple model that we have discussed so far. But real life is considerably more complicated than a simple model. We're not going to be able, in the time we have available, to really discuss a lot of this in tremendous depth. But I at least want to highlight these are some things that we should think about, these are situations that we should worry about, or here are some interesting things to keep in mind if you are facing a queuing theory kind of problem. And there's a couple of things that I would like to talk about as potential settings. One of them I love and one of them that I hate: food halls and Service Ontario. No points for guessing which one I love and which one I hate. If you're not familiar with them, then perhaps a quick refresher. A food hall or food court is a place where there are a number of counter service restaurants, and frequently they offer different cuisines. So you have your choice amongst many different things, all of which are different from one another. Service Ontario, on the other hand, is a place of interaction with the administrative state, specifically the services that are administered by the provincial government of Ontario. Okay, which of these sounds like a fun adventure? I think you can probably guess. So one of the things that we will actually think about is that differentiates these is what are the services that are offered. And the way that we've talked about services up to this point in our discussion is that all offered services are the same, right? We have multiple servers, and those servers all offer the same services, and that resembles in a way the Service Ontario model, right? There are a number of different things you can do there. You can renew your driver's license, you can get your health card issued, you can update your vehicle registration, whatever it is. Any one of the staff members there can help you with whatever task you've come to Service Ontario today to do. And that's good. That's what we want. We don't want, there are specialists where you have to wait in line for the one person who knows how to renew your driver's license. That's a little bit silly, but that helps. There are other situations where individual members of staff cannot necessarily provide all services, and therefore you must queue for the specific thing that you want, even if other things are not busy. There's no queue, or at least a shorter one, and a food hall can kind of look like that, right? If you are really interested in tacos, you can only get them from the Mexican restaurant. You can't get them from the gelato stand. And the Mexican restaurant, being popular, has a long queue, lots of people waiting, and maybe there's no queue at the gelato stand. Maybe it's a cold day and people are not that interested in getting it. But that doesn't help you because, gelato people can't make you a taco. They don't have the ingredients. They don't have the equipment. It just doesn't work. And that leads to a question about whether things are interchangeable, and we're going to revisit this idea of whether things are interchangeable, but we'll say maybe. Both of them are food, gelato and tacos, but you would probably agree that they are not exactly the same. If you ordered tacos and the server at the restaurant brought you gelato, you would probably have questions. You wouldn't say, "Oh, this is fine. This is exactly what I ordered." Another thing that we do need to consider is the idea of maintenance, planned and otherwise, and realistically services have downtime. Sometimes it's planned, sometimes it's not. And that can certainly throw a wrench into things unexpectedly, and sometimes it means closing a particular queue and just sending requesters elsewhere. Right? If it's a short-term thing, we just need to fix this briefly, then we don't have to kick everybody out of the queue. They just have to wait a little bit longer. But sometimes there's no quick recovery from the situation that we're facing. If the pizza oven breaks, they can't make any more pizza, at least not today. And everybody who's currently in the line for the pizza needs to go somewhere else if they want to get some lunch. We don't usually account for this directly when planning and designing our systems, possibly because we expect things to always be available and for people to get paged to fix it if it's not, and with the expectation that this is going to be attended to quickly. However, planned maintenance might be accounted for. You might just say, aha, we have regular maintenance or regular downtime in our estimates of how many customers we can serve in a given period. You wouldn't use it to calculate, how many customers you can serve in an hour, unless you have to do maintenance every hour. But you might use that to calculate how many customers you can serve in a day, where you say, okay, during these hours we don't have maintenance, and during these hours we do. Those kinds of things can actually happen. And you could, if it was truly critical, account for unplanned downtime in service capacity design. But usually, what you try to do is guarantee a certain level of uptime. How many nines would you like to have? In the expectation that if we can live up to that, then we've accounted for the downtime within our expectations, and we don't need anything else to cover unplanned downtime. But new things can appear as well. New services can come online also. And that could be, more workers at Service Ontario, but that's not the kind of thing that I mean. But more like what happens if a new restaurant opens. A new Bon May place opens, then people who are currently in line for different food might switch because actually they would prefer this over the tacos. That's totally their preference, but of course in reality, like a restaurant opening, the presence of a new kind of service is rarely truly a surprise. People have worked pretty hard to build and test and deploy the software, and it's not like we just wake up one day and suddenly a new thing is there, right? Somebody did have to go to the effort of actually making the thing. And so a new restaurant that's coming into a place probably has coming soon signage, to give you a hint that it's there and it's not a surprise on the day that it opens that it is in fact opening. At least I hope not. I mean, it could be. Sometimes they have like pop-up restaurants, and in the pop-up restaurant they don't announce really that it's going to open. It just shows up, and word spreads on social media. So I say rarely a surprise, but not never. And then there's interchangeability. And interchangeability of services is a spectrum, right? There's different ideas about how much interchangeability there exists. At one end of the spectrum, there is total interchangeability or full interchangeability, which is like, I am completely starving. I haven't eaten anything in days. I don't care if it's tacos or pizza or shawarma. I will eat anything. So, okay, in that case, all the services at the food hall are interchangeable. Food is food. I'll take it. Then there's partial interchangeability. This is what happens when you have preferences, but you would accept something else. You're just a little bit hungry. You want the tacos, but you would choose shawarma under certain circumstances. The line is too long for the taco place. Or just you've decided for whatever reason that you would accept shawarma because your friends want to go there instead. That would be fine. And then there's no interchangeability, and that is what happens in the food hall scenario, where there's only one thing. I have my heart set on one food item, and I will accept nothing else. Now, I mean, in the food situation, as I say, there is necessarily some implication of interchangeability because all of the things that we're talking about are food. So that does make it a little bit easier. Whether things are actually interchangeable in real life depends on a couple of things, right? At least the possibility exists because these are all food, but the dietitian might not agree with you about these things being totally interchangeable, right? Every option does have nutritional value in the sense that it's like edible food with calories and macronutrients. A nutritionist might say that gelato has no nutritional value. Because it's not a healthy, in quotation marks, choice. That's a matter of opinion, I would suppose. But there are other things, right, where it is simply not possible to interchange them at all. If I go to Service Ontario with the intent to renew my driver's license, getting a new health card is not a valid substitute. The new health card does not permit me to drive. And that's not what I want. That's not why I came here. So not everything is going to be interchangeable, and that's okay. With that said, that leads us to sort of an interesting thought, and it's not just availability of the services and what they represent that determines whether or not something is interchangeable, but also my particular desires as a person. If I am here for a driver's license because I really wish to operate a motor vehicle in a legal manner in the province, then I'm the one who's saying interchangeability does not exist. And if someone's a vegetarian, just as an example, they might be okay with tacos or pizza because there are vegetarian options there, but not shawarma because it involves meat. If you're vegan, maybe the only option for you is the taco stand, no matter how good the pizza place is, or no matter how long the line for tacos is. Speaking of lines being way too long, here's one situation in which the line could actually be very, very long. Airports are fun. Do not recommend. So while we're on the subject, when you're in the food hall and the length of the line is just way too long, we would experience one of three things. And they're called balking, reneging, and loss. We'll talk about each of them in turn, just so you get a full understanding of the difference between them. So balking is the first one, and it is what happens if you just don't get in line at all. You look at the line, you decide it's too long, and you figure there's no point, I'm not going to waste my time. This is super common. If I want to go to Service Ontario and it's just super busy, there's a line, it's out the door, I'm not going to bother. I can come back another time, hopefully. Sometimes it's very important to do something before a deadline. You have to renew this before it expires, so in that case, I don't really have a choice. I have to do it before the expiration of the driver's license, but obviously I hope I haven't left it to the last minute so I can come up another time if I want. But if the food hall situation, if the line for tacos is super long, maybe I'll decide to queue up for the shawarma instead. It's just the wait time for tacos exceeds how much I'm willing to wait. Reneging is what happens if I enter the queue, say for tacos, but before I get to the front, before it's my turn, I just give up. I leave. If it's taking too long and I'm really hungry or just impatient, this could happen. It can also happen if I'm at Service Ontario, on a lunch break, and time is just running out. I need to go back to work. Then there's kind of no escaping the fact that, well, because I need to go back to work, I'm going to have to leave the line, even though I've been waiting in the line for some amount of time. And that's tremendously frustrating because I've had all the downsides of waiting with not even getting the service that I want. And finally, loss is what happens when service is refused because of capacity limits. So you're not allowed to get in the queue no matter how much you want to. This comes from the idea of early telephone systems. An early telephone system had a certain number of circuits, usually K in the example, and if none of the K circuits were free at the time the person wanted to make a call, the call is just dropped. That is, call fails. You can't make a call, and it just doesn't happen. That makes it in queuing theory notation an MMKK system as far as we're concerned. I have experienced it once in my life that all circuits were busy. It was a day on which a major world event occurred, and I wanted to make a phone call, and it took more than one try before a circuit was available. It's not that interesting a story, but it is something. In the food hall or the Service Ontario example, this is what happens if there is a capacity limit to the building. The fire marshal permits only so much occupancy in the building, and if that's reached, then I'm turned away by building security. I'm not allowed to queue up no matter how much I want the tacos or how excited I am to get a new health card. Now, in both cases where I chose to leave, whether that's I don't enter the queue in the first place, or whether it's I've given up and renege, there's an implicit calculation. It could be explicit, but there is some sort of calculation. And what do we think that would be? Okay, so if there are X people in line already, so I'm taking an estimate of what is the queue length at present, assuming I have kind of a good view of it, and the service rate, how fast the queue is moving. Then I've got an estimate for how long I think I would have to wait before it was my turn. Given this, I compare it with my estimated willingness to wait, and then I make a decision. Do I get in the queue or do I not? Okay. Yeah, it's possible the establishment is also kind enough to put out signs that say, the expected waiting time from this point is X minutes. I wouldn't say that's very common in a food hall or in a Service Ontario situation, but it is possible you could do that if you wanted. And people might appreciate it because it would help them have some idea of how long the queue is without having to do the math themselves. But yeah, I'm comparing this against my own willingness to wait. Now, this is an estimate, right? I didn't count specifically how many people there are in line, and I also didn't use, most likely, a stopwatch to time how quickly people are being served at the counter. So I'm just guessing. So my estimate could be wrong, right? It's just an estimate. If the line is so long, I don't see the full thing. I don't actually know how long it's going to take to wait, and so my guesses are wildly inaccurate. I tried my best, but I simply got it wrong. But there is one more scenario where actually my estimate was wrong, and it's because people can join the line ahead of me. This is outrageous. It's unfair. But fairness is a question of perspective. Okay, so priorities for queuing can exist. When I was last in Service Ontario, it inspired me to actually write this topic, so it shouldn't be a surprise that I was recently at a Service Ontario. There was an elderly person who had some mobility restrictions, and that person showed up while I was waiting in line, and this person was permitted to go to the front of the queue. So that is to say, they had a higher priority in this situation than I did as an able-bodied young person. So it's actually sensible, right? It's asking a person who is elderly with mobility restrictions to stand in line and wait a long time for their service to be done at Service Ontario is actually not very nice to them. And in my case, I can afford to wait a little bit longer. This person obviously would be quite uncomfortable if they had to stand in line for a super long time. So I don't object. However, this is a situation like when there is a person with a higher priority in which my initial estimate, even if I got everything right in terms of calculating the service time and calculating length of the queue, is wrong because they go in line ahead of me and that increases my waiting time. So that makes my wait longer, and potentially if this happens enough, it makes me give up waiting. Right? If I never get any closer to the front of the queue because someone always appears with higher priority who gets a spot in front of me, sooner or later I'm going to say, listen, it's been fun. I've really enjoyed standing in line here at the Service Ontario, but I have to get on with my life now. And that makes my wait longer, and I might actually have to give up. And that can explain some of reneging. So it's not just, I got it wrong and I have decided that actually the actual wait time exceeds my expectation and therefore I'm leaving. It can also be my estimate was correct, but I have altered the deal. Pray I don't alter it any further has occurred. Priorities actually open up a number of interesting questions because they can have some fun effects on queues and queuing theory. And so we're going to actually take a few minutes to ask some of these interesting questions, and we'll try to think about them and see if they lead us to any interesting conclusions. So one item is how much, if any, does giving priority to one group over the other help the group that is being given priority? I mean, at a glance, it sounds like this would be good if I can always, move to the front of the line because I am extremely important. I probably like that, and it probably helps me accomplish whatever I plan to do today faster. So, but how much does it help me? right? The answer varies based on the nature of the system and the nature of the service that we are offering. And going to the front of the line is not a huge time savings if the line was already only 2 people, but it's a huge time savings if the line was 2,000 people. So how much does giving priority actually help? The converse of that is how much, if any, does giving priority to one group disadvantage the group not being given priority? And it may matter a lot. It may matter only a little tiny bit. If you covered some scheduling algorithms previously in another course, you might have seen things like, if we do shorter jobs faster, or shorter jobs earlier, then it reduces the amount of time that it takes on average for jobs to be completed, but the total time doesn't change. And so maybe giving priority to one group doesn't really disadvantage the other group, depends by how much. And it's an interesting question to consider based on whatever system we are evaluating. A couple of other questions. Can the priority system incentivize people to choose things that are less popular? That if the wait time for a particular thing, tacos, becomes longer because certain people are able to go faster, able to get to the front of the line there, does that incentivize people who would have normally queued for tacos to decide, actually they would rather have pizza? It's kind of a good question. Another thing that we could ask about is how much is too much? If everybody has priority, that's the same thing as nobody has priority, right? There's no benefit to a system in which everybody is the most important category, because nobody is going to benefit from it. It'd be the same as if no priority system existed at all. But similarly, if there exists no priority system, it's also wrapping around at the other end of the spectrum. So somewhere in between, there is probably some point at which having a priority is helpful to some and detrimental to others, but at what point do we cross over to it's no longer useful? Anyway, you can think of certainly some other questions related to the priorities and what happens if we give priorities, and what happens if we have more than one kind of priority. In this case, I've just introduced the idea of there's 2 levels, there's priority and not priority, but of course in other situations there can be many different levels. You need only look at airline frequent flyer programs where there's people at the top of the pyramid, and then there's the next level down, and there's the next level down after that, and lots of things have gold, silver, bronze levels. So it can certainly get more complicated than this, but maybe we just think about a simple scenario where there's only 2 levels of priority, and as some thought experiment, you could think about how your answers to these questions would change if there were 3 levels of priority.